Good afternoon, everyone. Apologies for the wait and thank you so much for your patience. You're very welcome to Music Unveiled. My name is Maeve. I'm from Music Connects. You may have seen us before under a different name, which was Galway Music Residency, but we have a new name forevermore now as Music Connects, and we're delighted to connect with you here today. I'm going to hand you over now to Dr. Aidan Thomson, who is going to bring us through one of Beethoven's fantastic string trios. You'll notice that we're in trio formation rather than quartet formation, something a little bit different today, and I hope it brings you as much joy as I'm hoping it will bring me. So Aidan, over to you. Thank you so much.
Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about Beethoven's string trio. There's Beethoven in the background, scowling as is his wont. And a little bit about this trio first of all. First of all, as you can see, a string trio is a work for violin, viola and cello, so it's different obviously from a string quartet, obviously also different from a piano trio. A lot of the time when listening to a string trio, your first thought is probably going to be, I can't believe this isn't a quartet, because so often it sounds like a quartet. Everything's just a little bit more intense. And Beethoven wrote a handful of string trios at the start of his career, 5 altogether, very early in his career. And this is the last of these. He wrote 3 as part of his Opus 9, and this is the third of these trios. He composed it in the late 1790s when he was in his late 20s. He'd moved to Vienna by this point, 1797 to 98 roughly. Then the work was published in 1799. A little bit of interesting background to it that has got an Irish connection as well. The dedicatee was one Count Johann Georg von Braun. And if Braun doesn't sound, spelt that way, doesn't sound a very Germanic name, that's because it isn't. Count Johann Georg was the son of Georg von Braun, that's him up there on the left, giving a bit of a scowl, who was an Irish soldier of fortune. He was one of the wild geese who left Ireland after the Williamine Wars at the end of the 17th century. He joined the Imperial Army of Russia and ended up with a very distinguished career that all began in Limerick, where he was born. Became a landowner, and his son Johann Georg was born in Königsberg, and the family had lands in Livonia. And the Count Johann Georg was also a Russian army officer for a bit before settling down in Vienna, where he was a patron of the arts. The premiere of the work was given by members of the Ignaz Schuppanzig string quartet, and that's Ignaz on the right-hand side there. Now, this is a quartet that Beethoven would have further dealings with. They were latterly employed by one Count Razumovsky, for whom Beethoven wrote 3 very distinguished quartets a few years later that became part of his Opus 59. So as far as I'm aware, this is the first time that we encounter the members of the Schuppanzig quartet in any context with Beethoven. Now, this trio, there's 4 movements to it, so in other words 4 separate self-contained pieces that are all linked together. The first one, which we're going to be listening to today, the tempo marking, the speed marking, in other words, is allegro con spirito, so lively with spirit, and you'll hear the proof of that when we hear the piece. There's 3 other movements as well. There's a slow movement, adagio con espressione, slow with expression. A scherzo movement, which is a fast dance, marked allegro molto e vivace, so very lively and lively, so lively in other words. And then a finale marked presto, which means as fast as you can play it, basically. So I've let the trio off today with that. We'll be doing the first movement instead. And the first movement is in what we call sonata form. Now, what is sonata form? It's the standard form of first movements in the late 18th and much of the 19th century for pretty much all instrumental music, big and small. So anything from a piano sonata right the way up to a symphony and all points in between. You'll generally find that the first movement is going to be written in sonata form. And I'll be explaining what this form is in broad terms in just a moment. But it's a form that is based on the idea of contrast. And there's 2 types of contrast. One, contrast between different themes. And I'm going to be getting you to listen out for what the different themes are. And I'll be getting Bogdan and Andrea and Adrian to play some of these themes, but also a contrast in different keys as well, because the point about sonata form is that it is written in a particular key, but we move away from that key fairly early on, and part of the journey, the musical journey of sonata form is to get back to the original key and then hear all the themes in that original key. So for that reason, there's a kind of musical narrative. There's a tension that is brought into the equation when we change key, and that tension is resolved when we return to our original key. And there's a kind of balance that goes on. You hear all the themes in different keys to start with, and then later on you hear them all in the same key. But one thing I must stress is it's not a formula. It's not a case that composers were thinking, right, this is how we write it. First theme here, second theme here, third theme here. Pour it all into the mold and out comes the piece. It's not like that. Every piece is different and there'll be some variations in form, and this is where the fun of the piece from a listener, from an analyst's point, comes in. So a bit more about sonata form. A sonata form may begin with a slow introduction. Just to let you know, this piece doesn't. It's a purely optional thing. And then we have the three main sections of sonata form. The exposition, where we are introduced to all the main themes, and this is usually repeated in music of the late 18th century. Then we have a development, which, as the name would suggest, develops the themes that we've just heard, may introduce us to some new ones as well. And then we have a recapitulation. The recapitulation, broadly speaking, is the same as the exposition. We hear the themes that we heard in the exposition. But as I will explain in a moment, the keys are slightly different. And then at the end of the recapitulation, a composer may add a short coda as well. And we do have a short coda in this piece. So, slightly more detail about how the sonata form works. The exposition, this is where we're introduced to the themes. Broadly speaking, there are four sections within this. We have our first theme, what's known as the primary material, which we hear in the home key. There's then a transition section, which is where we change to another key. And then we will have usually two other themes, the secondary material and the closing material. And these will be in a different key from where we started. So broadly speaking, we're dealing with three themes, primary, secondary, and closing. And then a passage, a bridge passage, a transition passage between the primary and the secondary theme in order to bring about the change of key. And it's this change of key that creates the tension in the movement. Then the development, as I say, we have the material developed from the exposition, and here we can modulate, as to use the technical term, in other words, change key to all sorts of different keys, and that's generally what the composer will do. Mix things up a bit. And at the end of it all, we return to the original key, to the home key as we call it, and we get to the recapitulation. And the recapitulation, we hear the same themes in the same order, normally, as we did the first time round. We hear the primary theme, the transition, the secondary, and the closing. But this time, it's all in the one key. It's all in the home key. And the idea of this is a sense that the tension that we had of changing key early on has now been resolved. We're hearing everything now in the home key. We've got home, in other words, and each stage of the recapitulation is the equivalent of having gone home. It's shutting the door, it's locking the door, it's pulling down the shutters, it's putting the telly on, essentially. That's the principle of the recapitulation. And all this tonal tension and thematic tension, in theory, should have dissolved. So that's sonata form in a nutshell. So the important thing to think of is different themes, primary, secondary, and closing. And I'll be pointing these out within this piece in just a moment. And also that there is a change of key. You don't have to listen out for the changes of key. That takes quite a lot of careful and experienced listening. But just to be able to identify the different themes is the important bit. Now, Beethoven generally adheres to this approach. Sometimes he may have more than one secondary theme, possibly in different keys. So in other words, we might be listening to four themes rather than three, but otherwise he tends to play it pretty much by the book, or at least by what becomes the book in due course. He also often has a coda to wrap up the loose ends at the end of the piece. And that's particularly if the piece is in a minor key, such as this one is. Which takes us to the first movement. And I'm just going to, before I play through the different themes, I want the trio to play the exposition of this movement, just to give you an idea of what it sounds like. And then I'll point out the individual themes one at a time. So take it away, guys. Thank you. So as I say, this is the exposition. This is the first section of the piece, and it's where we're introduced to all the main themes. So let's just go through them one at a time. I'm going to start off by asking the trio to play the primary theme. Now this is the first 10 bars, and it ends with what we call a cadence. In other words, it's the equivalent in a sentence of a full stop. And you'll hear it quite clearly, I think. So bars 1 to 10. Okay, you hear how there's a natural end to the phrase. Now that's our primary theme. That's all it is. It's that short. Beethoven doesn't waste time in his music. And one thing just to listen out for is that 4-note descent at the start of the theme. Da, 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 da. Because that's going to come back quite a bit later on. Okay, so that's our primary theme. Now our next section is the transition. And when you listen to this, you'll hear that the transition actually starts exactly the same way as the primary theme, but it ends slightly differently. It ends with some loud chords and then a big rest. And this is a standard feature at the end of the transition. There's a real sense of this is the end of the transition before we move on to the next section. The only thing that's a little bit odd is it doesn't really change key properly until the very, very last chord. But that's kind of neither here nor there. The important thing to listen out for is the fact you've got this big rest at the end of the theme. So we want to go from bar 10 through to 20, please. And that's our transition. So again, very, very short, very succinct, and with that, we're ready to move on to our next theme. Now, this is a piece where we have two secondary themes rather than one. And normally in a minor key movement, there's a very specific key that we would move to that's called the relative major. This is a piece in C minor. We'd normally expect this section to move to E flat major. Now, this theme isn't an E flat major, it's an A flat major. So it's as if Beethoven has inadvertently driven down the wrong road. He's gone into a cul-de-sac, he's got to get back out again. So we're going to hear this key, this theme that's in the wrong key, because during the course of the theme, we gradually move to the right key. We move to E flat major, as if Beethoven has set his sat nav on reset, and they're telling him, go back out the road, it's the next one on the right instead. So perhaps can we go from 21 to 40? So this is the first of our secondary themes. Starts off in the wrong key, finishes up in the right key. Okay, and now by this point we are in the right key, and we can then have the second of the secondary themes, and this goes from quite literally where we've stopped. So this little theme here, you'll hear it passed around from one instrument to another. Bogdan gets it first, then Andrea, and then Adrian after that. Okay. And that is our second secondary theme. Okay, and this is followed by our closing themes. Remember I said at the start we start off with primary theme, transition, secondary theme, closing theme. Well, Beethoven gives us a couple of closing themes as well. So we'll just listen to the first bit of closing theme, which is 48 to 61. Very nice, thank you. And you probably heard the rain outside. But in addition to that, you probably heard a big sweeping line that Bogdan played. Dum ba da 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 da. That's one that was going to come back again as well. Now, where we've just got to, there's another closing theme that Beethoven has as well. So we can go from where you just finished to the double bar. Thank you. And that little line, dum da 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 dum ba da 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 dum ba da 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 dum da 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 da. This also comes back later as well. Okay, so we've heard all the themes now. We've heard the primary theme, we've heard the transition, we've heard both secondary themes, we've heard both closing themes. Quite a lot of material for Beethoven to play with in the development. And the development is what comes next. And you're going to hear a few familiar bits from these earlier themes in the development. You'll hear quite a bit of the opening of the very first theme, ta, 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 those four descending notes. These come around quite a bit. You'll also hear some of the loud chords that we had at the end of the transition. They come back as well. And also the theme that we just heard in the second of the closing themes, it's going to come back quite a bit as well. And these are all themes that Beethoven uses in the course of the development. He takes them, he passes them to different instruments, he plays them in different harmonies, moves into different keys. He uses what's called sequence, which is when we take a particular idea, we pass it from one instrument to another, and we have lots of different keys in the process. So could you just play the development? So this is from 74 to 120. Now, as they're playing, by the way, I'll just point out the things as the different ideas as we get to them. So, descending line of the first theme. Fast descent to the violin. Second closing theme. And again. And again on the cello. Loud chords. Now we're getting ready for the recapitulation. Okay, thank you. I mean, I don't know how clearly you could hear what I was saying above the music, but that you, I hope, have heard some of these earlier passages that you, particularly the dum ba da dum ba da 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 da, that was passed around a lot early on. Also the cha cha cha, the loud chords that we had at the end of the transition, they came back again as well. So quite a few of the themes that we've already heard coming back in this development. Now, I'm not going to ask them to play all of the recapitulation, except just to say that that we're all in the one key, but it's basically the same themes as before. But the work ends with a coda, and this coda also is based on the opening four-note figure, da, 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 which is passed around from one instrument to another in sequence. And then there's one final statement of the primary theme at the very end. So perhaps could you go from the final second time bar to the end of the movement. So this is after we've got to the end of the recapitulation, of the words, after we've got to the end of the same music that you heard them play at the start. Beethoven needs to have something to round things off, to draw everything together, to tie up the loose ends. And as you can hear, it's a very kind of determined and definitive way of ending the movement, and something that Beethoven clearly felt was was necessary because, in fact, the recapitulation would otherwise have ended quite soft. So I don't know if we've got time to listen to the whole movement.
We must.
Well, that's me told. I don't know. Are you thinking of doing repeats?
No.
It's all right. So just straight through without repeats. Okay. Well, this is my kind of roadmap for how the piece works, and I'll just point out the different themes as we come. For those of you, if anyone is interested in keys as well, I've got these marked in, but don't be put off by those. What matters really is the broad sections: exposition, development, recapitulation, coda, and the different themes as we come to them. So I will point these out as we hear them, and hopefully you'll be able to hear each of the different themes in turn. Take it away, guys.
welcome back. I hope you feel refreshed after a little break. So we're moving from Beethoven to Greg Caffrey, and the big distinction being that we have the living composer with us here today, which is a real treat, and we're delighted to have you with us. We're going to be listening to Greg's piece, Pulled Down from the Young Breath-Giving Air. So that fits into our Stormy Weather theme. So we're thinking about the atmosphere, the air, and storms this month through our repertoire. Before I hand you over to Greg, though, I just want to acknowledge and say a real thank you to our funders, the Arts Council of Ireland, the University of Galway, and Galway City Council, who all contribute to make this series possible and, of course, free of charge. So now over to Greg for your big moment.
Thank you very much. Moving from Beethoven to Greg Caffrey, that's got to be a disappointment, let's face it, you know. What a way to set someone up, and what a great explanation of the trio as well. I think we should all be able to bring you home while we're playing records in the house so that you can explain the music for us. That would be brilliant. So anyway, yes, my name's Greg Caffrey. I'm from Belfast, which, believe it or not, is about 5 hours from here. I had no idea. I could have been in New York, you know, but I'd rather be here. In fact, Galway is a fantastic place. I love coming here. I've been here before. I've worked with the group before. In fact, they commissioned, in 2018, they commissioned my 4th string quartet, which also, the name has a connection with the name of this string trio as well, which I'll explain in a minute. But so lovely to work with these people who are not just great musicians, but great people. And so brilliant to be here in Galway. So, okay. So my piece, the first question you might ask is, where does the name come from? Pulled down out of the young, breath-giving air. Well, you might think it's very poetic, and it is very poetic, but I can't take any credit for that, because in fact, it's from a book that perhaps some of you have read called The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald, written in 1925. And I don't know if you guys remember, but the 4th string quartet was called Borne Back Ceaselessly into the Past, which is the very last line from that same book. And you're probably thinking now that everything that I write has a name drawn from The Great Gatsby. But in fact, this is only one of 2 pieces, the other one being the string quartet, that has a name taken from The Great Gatsby. Why am I fascinated with this book? Well, it's an amazing book, and those of you that have read it will agree. In fact, when I was reading through the book, I found the text so poetic that I kept jotting down possible titles for pieces. Almost on every page that I turned, I was taking another note, going, oh, that's a great title for a piece, and so on and so forth, you know. But this is a beautiful, in fact, I'll put it in context here. So the full paragraph that it comes from, and so with the sunshine and the great bursts of leaves growing on the trees, just as things grow in fast movies, I had that familiar conviction that life was beginning over again with the summer. There was so much to read for one thing, and so much fine health to be pulled down out of the young, breath-giving air. I mean, fantastic, you know. So this inspired the piece. Now, music is an abstract thing. I mean, no more so than in the piece that we've just been listening to by Beethoven. And so, you know, music, I guess its strength is that when we hear a piece of music, it means something entirely different to all of us. You know, that's one of the great things about music. And so, you know, there's no way that I can make this piece into a kind of narration of the novel. That's not the intention here. The idea was simply to try and reflect something of this little piece of poetry here, if you like. And I mean, obviously, this is to do with the coming of summer and the beauty of things beginning to grow speedily as they do in the summer. I know that for a fact because I live for a large part of the year in France, where things grow really rapidly. And I imagine Jane can tell us if it's true, but I imagine in this part of where the book was set, which I think was in Long Island, wasn't it? Yeah. Things grow quite fast, I'd say, in the summer. There's a kind of like a rush of, you know. So this is what I wanted to reflect. Okay. So it's important to say that the title is just a starting point for a piece of music, okay? That's where it ends. I'm not trying to reflect the novel in any way. The phrase makes reference to nature, to beauty and the dynamism of nature. And it suggests to me colour. And that's the thing that I wanted to focus on in this piece, is colour as it applies to music. See, I prepared my presentation on a different piece of software, so what happens behind me is likely not to have any connection at all with what I'm talking about. So yeah, the form is an interesting thing to talk about. I mean, we've just heard a description of sonata form. The form in this piece of music is really very simple. There's a kind of repeated idea that comes back where the three performers are playing a kind of a wind motif. It's almost an imitation of wind, which draws on this idea of pulling something down from the air. And this happens no less than 11 times in the piece. And in between it, we have other bits of music juxtaposed. So that is basically the form. It couldn't be simpler. You've got this wind idea, you've got another idea, a wind idea, another idea, a wind idea, another idea, and so on. Okay, so very, very simple. And the other thing that I want to focus on here is, if you'll just hit the next one for me, Oisin, thanks very much, is texture, which is the way in which harmonic, melodic, and rhythmic materials are combined. And these combinations will often include effects, natural or peculiar to the instruments. I'm going to talk a little bit about that with examples, with the guys in the group playing examples of this. And and finally, colour. The term colour in music might describe the combinations of dynamics, expression, and timbre. Timbre, you know, it's a word that perhaps you may not have met before. But I mean, for example, the cello has a very different timbre to the violin, you know, by sheer virtue of the size of the instrument. And similarly, if you get an instrument from a completely different family, like a clarinet, it'll have a completely different timbre to any of these string instruments. So that's what we mean by differences of timbre. My phone keeps going to sleep here, so every time I go back to my notes, they're gone. All right. So, for the first example, what we're going to do, we're just going to play the first 2 bars, if that's okay.
3 bars or 2?
2. The first 2 bars. And let's just play it, and then I'll talk a little bit about it. Thank you very much. This is my first time hearing this as well. So, beautiful. So you may have noticed that when the chord starts here, all the notes don't start at the same time. The chord builds, okay? In fact, you can see it. I mean, I know that perhaps some of you don't read music. It's not important that you do. But you can see here, for example, that the cello's coming in first, followed by the viola, followed by the violin, and another note on the violin, and then back to the viola again, and so on. And these notes are sustained so that it builds this chordal texture. And to me, this almost sounds, I mean, I'm only thinking about this in retrospect. This wasn't something that I had planned. But when I listen to this now, it almost sounds like a flower opening, if that makes any sense, you know? So again, it ties in with this idea of summer and blossoms and, you know, something happening that's exciting for the first time in the season, you know. Could we just hear that again? And we can think about this flower maybe, you know. Okay, lovely. Sometimes we call that a kind of pyramid chord, you know, where the chord builds up to an apex. Now, even within that sound, you will have heard the viola playing a kind of very eerie, pitched sound. It's what we call a harmonic on a stringed instrument. In fact, it can be done on wind instruments as well, and many other types of instrument. But I thought it might be useful to isolate that and just allow Andrea to play that for us. Yeah. So the technique that's used there is she holds down a fundamental note and then touches the note. Just happens to be a perfect fourth in this case, but you hear that kind of very high pitched. It's kind of a glassy sound. I think that's a good way to describe it, perhaps. You'll hear a lot of that kind of thing. You'll hear harmonics played in all the instruments during the course of this piece. So that's something you could listen out for to see if you can pick out the harmonics from the other regular sounds in the piece. The other thing I'd like to draw attention to, this is the cello from bars 1 to 3. We're going to isolate the cello now, and the cello's playing a thing called a tremolando, which is where, I mean, these are not contemporary music effects. These are effects that go back hundreds of years in music, in fact. But anyway, if we could just hear this. Okay, lovely. So often tremolandi are used to kind of build tension in music, you know. So interesting anyway, and it's how all these various little sounds combine as well. Is what gives the music its color. You know, so you might have a harmonic happening in one instrument, you might have the tremolando happening in another instrument, etc. It's the combination of these things which bring the color to the music. Now, there's a kind of a novel effect that I mentioned earlier that keeps reoccurring in this piece, and we're going to play bars 15, bar 15 and 16, the full trio, if that's okay. And this is the bit that I talked about earlier where we have the tremolando happening in the three instruments, and they're playing between two notes, and they're also playing sul tasto on the fingerboard, which gives a very soft sound. And they've also got a little kind of graphic written in the piece as well, which asks them to play with the kind of a kind of wind sound. Okay, that's fine. So this is the idea that keeps coming back in this piece. So I think when you're listening to this, if you're coming along to the concert on the 4th of November, see how many times you can identify that when it arrives in the piece. In the next example, I'd like you to hear a combination of some of these techniques, just as I've mentioned. So in this next example, which is going to be for the purpose of the group, bars 4 to 7, the full trio. In this next example, we as I say, hear a combination of things. If you listen, you can hear the violin this time play the high harmonic rather than the high harmonic that we heard in the viola before. The viola plays a melodic idea which reaches upwards, with a little bit of tremolando that we talked about earlier, and the cello is playing a soft wind sound underneath. So this is a combination of different sounds to create, you know, a colourful whole, if you like. Lovely. And I also ask the players often to play, I've alluded to this already, but I ask them to play with the bow in different positions on their instrument, which makes a big difference to the sound, as we're going to hear now. There's a term for this, and that is sul ponticello, meaning, from your Latin languages, pont meaning bridge, it's playing at the bridge or close to the bridge, and sul tasto, which is where you're on the fingerboard. Now, in the next example, we can have the violin only playing bars 12 and 14, Bogdan, if that's okay. Now you hear the difference in tone quality, where it moves to a much more kind of trebly type of sound as it moves towards the bridge. This happens continually in the piece. In fact, all of these effects are constantly happening in different instruments, but this sul ponticello, sul tasto thing is going from instrument to instrument throughout the piece. In the next example, we're going to hear an effect called a Bartók pizz, which obviously takes its name from the composer Bela Bartók. And the pizzicato, you'll know, it's a familiar sound. You'll have heard it in the Beethoven, for example. Bartók pizz is a little bit different because it's a little bit more aggressive, and it's basically where the player pulls the string upwards and snaps it down on the fingerboard. Exactement, that's it. So we're going to hear bars 18 and 19 with the full trio, where I think you all play a Bartók pizz at some point. Okay, so now when you listen through to this on the 4th of November, you'll be able to kind of hear these Bartók pizz, identify them, and know exactly what's going on in the texture. Finally, I'd like to talk a little bit about dynamics more generally in this piece, because I rarely ask the players to play at the same dynamic all the time. In fact, they're playing with a vast range of dynamics, and they're swooping in and out of each other in terms of the volume. When we talk about dynamics, we're really talking about the volume of the piece, So as a good example of this, if we could play bars 43, maybe starting at beat 3 through to bar 50, and what you'll hear here is you'll hear the violin play a melody which begins very quietly and grows gradually. You'll hear the viola play bursts of notes, with each phrase starting moderately loud, but getting quiet each time. And you'll hear the opposite in the cello. It's playing harmonics, with each one starting very quietly and getting very loud. So all the instruments are doing completely different things in terms of dynamics here. Thanks very much. Brilliant to have these live illustrations. I think this is a great format, So that's really all I wanted to talk about. I wanted to kind of point out these little textures that occur in the music, so that when you're listening on the 4th, and in fact, I don't know if you're planning to play this right now, are you? It's quite a short piece, Okay, so I mean, you can when we're listening through now, you can try and pick these things out as they occur. And again, when you come along to the concert on the 4th, you'll be able to kind of hear these things. So I'll just hand over to the trio then.
You mentioned after the first example that it was your first time hearing it.
Yeah.
I could never write for one instrument and have it be that complicated without knowing, or I suppose hearing it being played back live for me. Is there some trick to the trade of writing for all of this?
Well, I should say it's the first time hearing it from this trio. I heard one other performance of it by a different trio, but still, it's incredible. I mean, it was many years ago as well, so it's really interesting for a composer just to hear. I mean, we didn't rehearse either, so it's fantastic just to hear those sounds that have lived in your head. Yeah, no, that's not what I meant. But yeah, I mean, these sounds live in your head, I guess, and then when you hear a group play them, it's very gratifying.
Had you been hearing them as you were composing as well?
Yes.
Or it was all just head to paper?
It's head to paper, but we have these remarkable software programs nowadays as well, where you can program stuff in and you can hear things back. Now, it's only useful in terms of hearing back rhythms and harmonies and that kind of thing, because a software program can't do the kinds of effects that we've talked about today, or at least not in any accurate way, you know. No, I think that as a composer, you need to have a certain imagination, and you need to kind of like hold the piece in your head and hope that at some point some real human beings are going to come and play it for you and represent what you'd previously kind of considered, you know. So, yeah.
Thanks, Oisin.
Yeah, I was just wondering when did you write it, and in relation to your string quartets, I think you have 4.
It's 5 actually. I have a new one just since the spring.
You have a 5-string quartet.
5 now, yeah.
Brilliant. So I'm wondering how you felt dealing with 3 strings rather than 4. I mean, 4 is kind of the standard, what we're used to dealing with, and a trio is more unusual.
Yeah.
And it's quite different. I just wonder if you could talk about how that feels.
Yeah, I'm not sure that. I'd be interested to write more trio music, actually, simply because, there's different ways of looking at that, because you could say that the trio is a very natural kind of ensemble, because there's one one of each instrument, you know, whereas you've got the quartet, you've got this doubled voice at the top. So it's probably a good idea to look at this as being a kind of very natural format, and the quartet as being. I know the quartet is supernatural, you know. I mean, the quartet obviously reflects what happens in an orchestra. You know, the way the strings are broken down more. You know, so that's why it's become a standard. But for me, I think writing for string trio. I've only ever written this piece, and it's only a short piece for string trio. But I think that this feels quite natural to me, you know, writing for string trio. It's something that I'd like to do a little bit more of. But it's an interesting question, Jane. What do you think about that?
I thought it sounded very natural, and it made me kind of want to write for a string trio.
Have you not written anything for?
I thought it worked really well, like the balance, you know, with the 3, you could hear them so clearly.
But I'm surprised you haven't written anything for string trio, no?
What?
Have you not written anything for trio?
No, I don't know any string trios. Not going to write for nothing, but I mean for nobody. But I was intrigued with the combination. I wondered, you know, like we're so used to dealing with quartets, and we have the kind of balance between all of them. So you kind of have to readjust when we have only 3.
I suppose the same question could be asked of the players. You know, do they find it weird all of a sudden playing in this format? I mean, you've probably done this. I'm sure you've done trio gigs before.
We did it students as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did play in string trio. I mean, I find it more demanding and more difficult than in the string quartet.
Yeah.
Everything is kind of, as you said, Jane mentioned, is more balanced, because the first violin takes up the first 2 strings, and then like the second violin the lower strings, and then connect somehow. And I found harder work on the viola, because especially in the classical repertoire, sometimes you have to do double stops, so to do 2 jobs for the price of 1, playing both second violin and the viola parts. But I found it tricky, yeah. Even though in the orchestra for the intonation, let's say it takes 3 instruments to get the right intonation, so that could be right. But yeah, I don't know. I always find when I play in a trio, I had to do more work than in string quartet. I mean, like concentrate and everything. Yeah. Other than that, you play so many groups. It's a pleasure always to do.
What would be interesting would be to add a double bass, so you've got 4 distinct voices rather than the normal quartet.
Overpower the violinist, No, but
But it's interesting because then you get the full spectrum of sounds and frequencies, you know.
And also, when you look at a piece, I mean, even playing in a string quartet, you never look as a string quartet player or as a string trio. You just look at the piece. So sometimes you forget if it's a solo, quintet, quartet. So it's just like picking up a role in a play, or in a film. So you just take it as it is.
But I think, Jane, that it is something you would have to get accustomed to. I would have to get accustomed to as a composer. You know, I mean, this is a short piece, and it's taken me a long time to learn to write for quartet, and I think that it would take me an equally long time to really get to grips with this format.
When did you write it, Greg?
2016, and I did some revisions just for this event, but 2016, so that's quite a while ago now.
Yeah, it's very effective. Well done.
Thank you very much. Thank you.